If you would turn in your Bibles to Luke chapter 12, we continue our study in the book of Luke. Luke chapter 12. In 1960, there was a startup franchise in football called the Dallas Cowboys. They hired a young coach by the name of Tom Landry. I was a huge Cowboys fan growing up, just absolutely loved the Dallas Cowboys, and a lot of others were too because they actually had a nickname called the America's Team. Y'all remember that? That was not rhetorical. Part of the reason, maybe just a little, but part of the reason they were so popular was because of their head coach, Tom Landry. He was an extreme man of faith. He wasn't ashamed of his faith. In fact, he would share it with the media. He would share it with his staff, certainly his players, and with anyone who would listen. If you knew anything about Tom Landry, you knew that he was a Christian man. Listen to what he said about his priorities, and that's what we're going to talk about today, is the fact that priorities matter. Priorities matter. And I want you to listen when Tom Landry was asked about his priorities. He said, "The thrill of knowing Jesus is the greatest thing that ever happened to me. I think God has put me in a very special place, and He expects me to use it to His glory in everything I do. Whether coaching football or talking to the press, I'm always a Christian. Christ is first, family is second, football third." What do you think? Pretty good, isn't it? In 1988, the Dallas Cowboys were taken over by a new CEO, a man that still runs the team today, an oil man from Arkansas named Jerry Jones. He bought a controlling interest in the Dallas Cowboys, and when he did so, he fired legendary coach Tom Landry. And he hired a new coach to lead his team into the future, and he could not have picked anyone more contrasting to replace Tom Landry. They hired a man out of Miami Hurricanes named Jimmy Johnson. Many of y'all remember these days. He had success on the field, winning the same amount of Super Bowls as Tom Landry did, which was how many? Does anybody know? 2. But his character could not have been more different. Jimmy Johnson made it plain that in his speaking, he said this one time, that he had divorced his wife of 26 years when he left coaching a college team to become a head coach in the National Football League. He said he needed a wife while coaching on the college level for social functions and to show families that he would be looking out for their sons. In pro football, however, she was unnecessary equipment and a distraction to winning. He said winning football was his number one priority and his 2 sons second. How tragic. I haven't rooted for them since hiring Johnson. In fact, I don't even watch pro football anymore because I feel like they're unpatriotic and they're a promoter of sinful behavior. By the way, I don't need football, I need Jesus. So I want to set today's text as a review, reminding some of what we talked about last week. If we went back and looked at the passage starting at verse 1 from last week, and I'm not going to read it, but we would see, first of all, the audience that he had. It was a large crowd. In fact, it says there was such a large crowd that the people were stepping on one another. Many thousands of people, it says in the text. They were stepping on one another. There was a tremendous amount of people there. So it was a large crowd. And there was been apostles that were there, certainly, other followers that were there. There would have been people that were curious about who Jesus was and what He could do. There would be people there, I'm sure, looking for a need to be fulfilled because they had heard some of the miracles that Jesus had performed. And certainly, whenever we see a crowd gathered, the Pharisees and scribes would have been in there, and as Jesus is speaking, they're looking for a way to find something to hold against Him. So that's the audience. We could look at the message that He gave. Again, as He gave this message to the large crowd, it was about hypocrisy. It was about sin. Jesus spoke about who to be fearful of, which is God, and who we shouldn't be fearful of, and that's men. And He talked about heaven and hell to a certain extent. And when He was doing that and teaching on this very important subject, what happens? But someone interrupts. And that's sort of where we come into our passage today. An interrupter. When things are going right, when the Lord's working, when you see things starting to fall into place, and you start seeing some momentum come in the church, and some things start to happen, there's always going to be an interrupter. There's always going to be, Satan's going to make sure there's going to be a distraction there to get our attention off of what's important. So let's read the text today. We'll start at verse 13 and go through 34. If you would mind standing in reverence and in honor of God's holy word. Luke chapter 12, starting at verse 13. Someone in the crowd said to him, now remember, he's preaching this message, he's giving them important stuff, right? And someone in the crowd says to him, "Teacher, tell my brother to divide the family inheritance with me." By the way, was he talking about the family inheritance? Was he talking about money? At this point, no, he wasn't, right? He wasn't talking about those issues. This guy's, he's an interrupter. He says, tell my brother to divide the family inheritance with me. And he said to him, Jesus said to him, "Man," by the way, this is as you would read it, it's sort of a derogatory term. "Man, who do you think you are?" That's the way we would use it. He says, "Man, who appointed me a judge or arbitrator over you?" Then he said to them, so Jesus turns this interruption into another way to give them a message. "Beware and be on your guard against every form of greed, for not even when one has an abundance does his life consist of his possessions." And he told them a parable, saying, "The land of a rich man was very productive. And he began reasoning to himself, saying, 'What shall I do, since I have no place to store my crops?' Then he said, 'This is what I will do. I will tear down my barns and build bigger ones. And there I will store my grain and my goods. And I will say to my soul, Soul, you have many goods laid up for many years to come. Take your ease, eat, drink, and be merry.' But God said to him, 'You fool, this very night your soul is required of you. And now who will own what you have prepared? So is the man who stores up treasure for himself and is not rich toward God.' And he said to his disciples, 'For this reason I say to you, do not worry about your life as to what you will eat, nor your body as to what you will put on. For life is more than food, and the body more than clothing. Consider the ravens, for they neither sow nor reap, they have no storeroom nor barn, and yet God feeds them. How much more valuable you are than the birds. And by which of you by worrying can add a single hour to his lifespan? If then you cannot do even a very little thing, why do you worry about other matters? Consider the lilies, how they grow. They neither toil nor spin. But I tell you, not even Solomon in all his glory clothed himself like one of these. But if God so clothes the grass of the field, which is alive today and tomorrow is thrown into the furnace, how much more will he clothe you, you men of little faith? And do not seek what you will eat and what you will drink, and do not keep worrying. For all these things the nation of the world eagerly seek, but your Father knows that you need these things. But seek his kingdom, and these things will be added to you. Do not be afraid, little flock, for your Father has chosen gladly to give you the kingdom. Sell your possessions and give to charity. Make yourselves money belts which do not wear out, an unfailing treasure in heaven where no thief comes near nor moth destroys. For where your treasure is, there your heart will be also." What's the point? Our priorities matter, doesn't it? Where our treasure is, there will our heart also be. Let's stop and ask the blessing upon the reading of God's holy, inerrant word. Brother Bob, would you mind leading us, please? Amen. You may be seated. So as we look at the text today, we see that there are this gentleman interrupts, and he brings up something that wasn't even being talked about. And he said, "Rabbi or teacher, tell my brother to share the inheritance, my parents' inheritance with me." And we really don't know what the inheritance is. It doesn't say in the text what it is. Normally you think of inheritance, we think of money, right? But sometimes it could be an estate or stuff, right? Just stuff, valuable stuff. Obviously, if it wasn't valuable, would he have wanted it? No. So we see him interrupting, and he just throws this out there. Tell them to tell my brother to give me my inheritance. Now, this was not an uncommon thing with a rabbi. Rabbis often were the mediator between a family argument or something like that, and people would come to him. Now, the thing that's a little strange here is obviously his brother's with him, or he wouldn't be saying, tell my brother. His brother's obviously nearby or something, but he says this in front of the crowd as if he's going to embarrass his brother or something, I don't know. But he's here and he wants the rabbi at this point to stop what he's doing. He wants Jesus to stop what he's doing and turn to his brother and tell him, yeah, just share with your brother. Do what your brother wants. And of course, Jesus doesn't do that. This is a man that's consumed with greed. If he would interrupt the message from the Messiah and would try to distract the wonderful teaching that's going on for thousands of people that are gathered around for his own personal gain, this is a man that's consumed with greed. We have to be careful. Let's look at the text again. Just make sure we understand the context of the text. Someone in the crowd said to him, Teacher, tell my brother to divide the family inheritance with me. But he said to him, Man, who appointed me a judge or arbitrator over you? Then he said to them, Beware and be on your guard against every form of greed, for not even when one has an abundance does his life consist of his possessions. The Lord right off says, listen, I don't care how much you have, your life's so much more than the stuff. It's so much more than what you have or don't have. I've told this story before, and if you've worked in a nursing home or anything like that, you would probably verify what I'm saying. If you've been at a bed of people that are passing, and the one thing I've noticed is, and I don't know how many, if you want to know how many, I don't know how many people I've been with as they're passing and leaving this world, but here's what I would say. I've never heard any of them say this: I wish I'd have had more barns full of stuff. I've never heard one person said, you know what, I regret not making more money in my life. Not one. I've never heard anyone say, I wish I could have just accumulated more stuff. Not heard one. I've heard things like this. I wish I would have found the Lord earlier in life. I've heard people say, I wish I would have spent more time with my family. You see, at that time, it's not about money. It's not about stuff. You know what the important things are at that time, but what about now? Chances are if we're here, now we don't know what today holds, but chances are if we're here, we've still got some time left, should the Lord tarry. I hope He don't. I hope He comes today. But if He doesn't, we've got some time left. What are we going to do with that? Now, my first 2 points, consumed with greed and consumed with riches, and could have been one. But it seems like in the text and in our lives, sometimes those are two different things. So I just want to investigate that just a little bit. And so bear with me. If you think they're the same, that's fine. But the first one I want to mention is the stuff. Now, this man's inheritance, again, could have been money. But it also could have been things or land or something. Look at verse 15 again. Jesus said to them, Beware and be on your guard against every form of greed. For not even when one has an abundance does his life consist of what? He didn't say money here. He says possessions. What are possessions? It's things we buy with money, right? It's the things that we spend money on. He said our life is more than possessions. If you would skip down to 18, and it says in the parable here, this is what I will do. The rich man says this is what I will do. I will tear down my barns and build bigger ones or larger ones, and there I will store all my grain. Grain would have been how he made money. Look what he says, and my goods. What are goods? It's possessions. It's things we buy with money. So it could be possessions, not so much money. I want you to think about this. And I did some investigation. Over the last 50 years, that's basically my lifetime. Over the last 50 years in the United States of America, our houses have doubled in size and our families have reduced by half. Think about that. Houses have doubled in size, and our families have reduced in half. So it takes twice the amount of room to raise half the amount of kids. Isn't that weird? Does that seem weird to you? It seemed weird to me when I read that. Why is that the case? And then I got to thinking about this. One of the booming businesses in the last several years have been storage buildings. And if you think your mind right now is going, boy, there have been a lot of them built. Every time I turn around, there's another storage place being built. So houses are twice the size they were 50 years ago, and we still don't have enough room to put things in, so we have to rent storage buildings to put stuff in our houses that are twice as big as they were 50 years ago. That seems bizarre to me. Now, maybe it doesn't to you. It seems bizarre to me. 65% of self-storage renters have a garage in their home. What does that tell you their garage looks like, by the way? 47% have an attic, and 33% have a basement. This suggests that Americans have more things or more stuff than their homes allow them to have. I didn't do the math on this, but I read it. If every storage building in the United States of America was empty, listen to this, every American could stand under the roofs of these buildings. That's how many there are in the United States of America. At the same time, we have so much stuff that we have television shows about it. We have storage wars. We have auction hunters. We have storage hunters and auction kings. Isn't that amazing? Television shows based on the fact that people put their stuff in storage buildings. Not only that, for people who don't want their stuff stored down the road so they don't have access to it, they start packing it up in their houses, just in the middle of their living rooms and wherever they can store it. And they can't even get around in their homes. They just pile stuff up in their homes till it's unlivable. And so then we have TV shows like Clean House, Hoarders, and this one, I don't know what the show is, I've never watched it, but I love the title, Hoarding Buried Alive. Right? It's people that accumulate stuff that they really don't need. Just buying stuff and accumulate stuff. What's the point I'm making? The interpreter and the man in the parable could fit right in easily in the United States of America in our day. They would feel right at home. So you may not have these problems, but we can be consumed by things that aren't healthy, can't we? Technology has to be the main one. Cell phones, new TVs, whatever. Could be many other things. Could be recreation, entertainment. What do you have that has become a distraction from your life and growth with Jesus? It's not worth it. Whatever it is, it's not worth it. So then we see consumed with riches. Look at verse 16 following. He tells them a parable. The land of a rich man was very productive, and he began reasoning with himself. Now, I want you to notice, by the way, as we read this rich man, how many times he's consumed with himself. I, me, my. Okay, I want to start all over and read. He told them a parable. The land of a rich man was very productive. And he began reasoning to himself. I mean, not like he's not even talking to his wife. He's not talking to his neighbor. He has got so many people around him and friends that he's talking to who? Himself. Saying, what shall I do since I have no place to store my crops? Then he said, this is what I will do. I will tear down my barns and build larger ones, and there I will store all my grain and my goods. And I will say to my soul, soul, you have many goods laid up for many years to come. Take your ease, eat, drink, and be merry. But God said to him, you fool, This very night your soul is required of you. And now who will own what you have prepared? So is the man who store up treasure for himself and is not rich toward God. Wow. Look at the problem that he had. His problem was, even though he had enough or had plenty, he wasn't satisfied with what he had. He needed to build bigger barns, larger barns, to put his more stuff in, to more grain in, so he could make more money. By the way, I did some research on this. I'm thinking, there's nothing wrong with having grain, right? I mean, you have grain. But apparently, men like this in that time would have stored grain in their barns, and some people were impoverished around them, and they would store the grain, and they would keep it, and they would wait till the possible time when it was worth the most. So in other words, when people were desperate and would pay anything for it, that's when they would sell it. You wouldn't flood the market with grain because the grain would be worth less at that point. Does that make sense? So they would store it and store it and store it. So he needed bigger barns to put his grain in so he could make more and more and more money. Now, we would look at this maybe from the United States of America standpoint, and we would say, nothing wrong with making money. And there's not. There's not. But see, his heart was far from God. His heart was far from people. Lord, what's the greatest commandment? You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength. And the second is like unto it. You shall love your neighbor as yourself. Was he loving God? Was he loving his neighbor? The answer to that is no. I read this by about John D. Rockefeller, one of the richest men in the world 100 years ago or so, maybe a little more than that. He says, somebody was asked him, how much money is enough money? His answer was just a little bit more. At the peak of his wealth, Rockefeller had a net worth of about 1% of the entire U.S. economy. He owned 90% of all the oil and gas industry of his time. Compared to today's rich guys, Rockefeller makes Bill Gates and Warren Buffett look like paupers. And yet he still wanted how much? Just a little more. I've not quite made it yet. Our nation has been, over the last several years, has been consumed with winning the lottery. And the longer it goes before somebody wins, if I understand this right, the more the pot goes up. And so the more the pot goes up, the more people spend on lottery tickets trying to be the one that will win the big prize. See, everybody wants to win the money, not everybody, but most people want to win the money that could totally change their lives. And it's money that they have not earned. I guess most people think that there's nothing wrong with that. Rosa Grayson, Washington State, won $400 a week for life. She hides in her apartment. For the first time in her life, she has nerves. Everyone tries to put the touch on her. She says, people are so mean. I hope you win the lottery and see what happens to you. That don't sound like a blessing, does it? The McGirders of New York won the Irish sweepstakes. They were so happy. Pop was a steam fitter. Johnny was 26. He loaded crates on docks. Tim was going to night school. Pop split the million with his sons. Million with his sons. They all said the money wouldn't change their plans. You want to say, yeah, right, or you want me to? A year later, the million was gone. The boys weren't speaking to Pop or each other. Johnny was chasing expensive racehorses. Tim was catching up with expensive girls. Mom accused Pop of hiding his stash from her. Within 2 years, all of them were in court for non-payment of income taxes. It's the devil's own money, Mom said. Both boys were studying hard to become alcoholics. All these people hoped for wealth, and they were all wrecked by a dollar sign. Story after story after story of the same things with lottery winners and people that inherited large sums of money. It's no different. Didn't earn it, didn't work for it, but yet I got it. That's the problem. Let's look at the results. This man was proud of what he had accumulated, the man in the parable, but had no thoughts of the one that had blessed him. And that very night, he would lose it all. Not only would he lose it all, he would lose himself. Scripture says, what would it profit a man if he would gain the whole world and yet forfeit his very soul? Hebrews 13:5. Keep your life free from the love of money and be content with what you have. For he has said, I will never leave you nor forsake you. Proverbs 22:7. The rich rules over the poor and the borrower is slave to the lender. 1 Timothy 6:10. Y'all know this, but make sure you read it right. For the love of money is the root of all kinds of evil. Not money, but the love of money is the root of all kinds of evil. It is through this craving that some have wandered away from the faith and pierced themselves with many pangs. 1 John 2. Do not love the world or the things in the world. If anyone loves the world, the love of the Father is not in him. For all that is in the world, listen to this, the desires of the flesh, the desires of the eyes, and the pride in possessions is not from the Father, but it is from the world. And the world is passing away along with its desires. But whoever does the will of God abides forever. Money isn't bad. In fact, a lot of good things could be done with money. But love the Lord and use the money. Don't let the money use you and keep you from loving the Lord. And then it brings up, seems like it's a transition or something here in the text, but it's really not. People that are consumed with no longer riches, no longer greed, but worry. And some people are worried about their riches and their greed. Look at verse 22 following. It says, He said to His disciples, For this reason I say to you, do not worry about your life as to what you will eat, nor for your body as to what you will put on. For life is more than food, and the body more than clothing. Consider the ravens, for they neither sow nor reap. They have no storeroom nor barn, as opposed to the man that was in the other parable. And yet God feeds them. How much more valuable you are than the birds. And which of you by worrying can add a single hour to his lifespan? If then you cannot even do a very little thing, why do you worry about other matters? Consider the lilies, how they grow. They neither toil nor spin. In other words, they don't make their own clothes. But I tell you, not even Solomon in all his glory clothed himself like one of these. But if God so clothes the grass of the field that is alive today and tomorrow is thrown into the furnace, how much more will He clothe you, you men of little faith? Do not seek what you will eat and what you will drink, and do not keep worrying. For all these things the nations of the world, or the Gentiles in another translation says, eagerly seek, but your Father knows that you have need of these things. Consumed with worry. Worry is the absence of faith. Well, we begin worrying when we lose faith in what God can do. Worrying about something that God can handle, and most of the time there's not something we can do about it anyway. Verses 25 and 26 brings that up. He says, which of you by worrying can add a single hour to his lifespan? Like we can go, no, that's not going to work, is it? In other words, there's nothing that you can do about that anyway. Jesus gives a couple of examples. Food. Food's pretty important, isn't it? I could prove it by preaching till 1. You'd be mad at me because you missed lunch. Food's very important. Something we would all worry about if we didn't have. But the Bible tells us over and over again that God provides for His children. Do you believe that? And clothing, verses 27 and 28 addresses this. By the way, Solomon was one of the world's richest men. And some say, according to world standards, if you look at the population of the world and the wealth of the world then, that Solomon is still, even including all these that I've mentioned today, still maybe the richest man to ever live. But even he wasn't dressed like the lilies of the field. So why worry? Trust Jesus. He loves you and has promised to take care of you. Why worry when you can trust? Someone said, worrying is like a rocking chair. It gives you something to do, but it doesn't get you anywhere. Someone else says, worry pulls tomorrow's cloud over today's sunshine. For several years, a woman had been having trouble getting to sleep at night because she feared burglars. And every time a little noise come, she'd wake up, and then she'd wake her husband up. She said, go check that out. Somebody's breaking in. And she was just scared to death. So finally, one night, her husband heard a noise in the house, and he went downstairs to investigate. When he got there, you know what he did find? He finally found a burglar. And he says, oh man, I'm so thankful you're here. My wife's been worrying about you for 25 years. Philippians 4. Do not be anxious about anything. Anything's sort of a broad term, isn't it? Do not be anxious about anything. But in everything, by prayer and supplication with thanksgiving, let your requests be made known to God, and the peace of God, which surpasses all understanding, will guard your hearts and minds in Christ Jesus. 1 Peter 5:7, casting all your anxieties on Him because He cares for you. Now, we're bringing it in for a landing. Do you know what the antidote for this is? If you're consumed over greed, if you're consumed over riches, if you're consumed about worrying, quite frankly, if you're consumed about anything else that is sin, I want to give you an antidote for it. I want to give you the cure for these things. And I think, no, it's scriptural. It's the only cure for these things. To be consumed with Jesus. He's the one telling the story here. He's the one that gave us this passage here. And as we look at the text, we see that only a few out of thousands and thousands were really consumed with Jesus. Isn't that amazing? Maybe you're not consumed. Maybe you would say, I'm not consumed with greed, riches, worry. Those things don't bother me. But maybe it's something else that is sin. Maybe it's jealousy, hatred, unforgiveness. Maybe it's 10,000 other things that are distracting you from growing in your faith. The answer is Jesus. So how do you become consumed, wrapped up, captivated, sold out to Jesus Christ? Only by knowing Him better. Only by knowing Him better. An old song says, the longer I serve Him, the sweeter He grows. The more that I love Him, more love He bestows. The more you know Jesus, the more you love Him. How do we know Him? Through His Word. There's no other way. You can say, well, I listen to you. Yeah, you listen to me 30 minutes on Sundays. Maybe a little more, but not much. Maybe even if you come back Sunday night, another 45 minutes or so. You need more than that in your life. If you really want to love Jesus, you need to be consumed with Him. There's an old song. Sing it with me if you know it. It's very repetitive. In the morning when I rise, in the morning when I rise, in the morning when I rise, give me Jesus. When I am alone, oh, when I am alone, when I am alone, give me Jesus. Give me Jesus. Give me Jesus. You can have all of this world. Give me Jesus. When I come to die, oh, when I come to die, oh, when I come to die, give me Jesus. Give me Jesus. Give me Jesus. You can have all of this world. Give me Jesus. Deuteronomy chapter 6. You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your might. Are you consumed with Jesus? You know what? He was consumed with us. He died so that we may live. And if we're consumed with Jesus, you know something else we're going to be consumed about? Is heaven. Because we don't just think of today. When we're consumed with Jesus, we think about tomorrow as well. 1 Corinthians 2:9, but as it is written, what no eye hath seen, nor ear heard, nor entered into the heart of man, what God has prepared for those who love Him. What a wonderful place we have waiting on us in heaven. Hebrews 11:16, talking about those that have went on to be with the Lord, those that have been persecuted for the faith. But it says, but as it is, they desire a better country. That is a heavenly one. Therefore God is not ashamed to be called their God, for He has prepared for them a city. And then Revelation 21 tells us about that city. Then I saw a new heaven and a new earth, for the first heaven and the first earth passed away, and there's no longer any sea. And I saw the holy city, New Jerusalem, coming down out of heaven from God, made ready as a bride adorned for her husband. And I heard a loud voice from the throne saying, behold, the tabernacle of God is among men, and He will dwell with them, and they will be His people, and God Himself will be among them. And He will wipe away every tear from their eyes, and there will no longer be any death. There will no longer be any mourning or crying or pain, for the first things have passed away. And He who sits on the throne said, behold, I am making all things new. And He says, write, for these words are faithful and true. Then He said, it is done. Jesus Himself says, I am the Alpha and the Omega, the beginning and the end. I will give to the one who thirsts from the spring of water of life without cost. He who overcomes will inherit these things. And I will be his God, and he will be my son. But for the cowardly and unbelieving and the abominable and the murderers and immoral persons and sorcerers and idolaters and all liars, their part will be in the lake that burns with fire and brimstone, which is the second death. I'm going to skip down. He says, and He carried, in verse 10, He carried me away in the Spirit to a great and high mountain and showed me the holy city, Jerusalem, coming down out of heaven from God. And he talks about how it's made with the different gems and the gold that's laid and all that. At the end of the chapter, he says in verse 22, I saw no temple in it. Listen to this. For the Lord God the Almighty and the Lamb are in its temple. And the city has no need of the sun or of the moon to shine on it. For the glory of God has illumined it, and its lamp is the Lamb. Isn't that good? Isn't that good? Where are you going? Where are you going? Because what you're consumed with determines where you're going tomorrow. What you're consumed with today determines where you're going tomorrow. You say, how is that? Because the evidence of our faith is what we believe in. The evidence is what we produce, right? Where are you going? Are you consumed with Jesus? Because if you're consumed with Jesus, you'll be going to heaven. But if you're consumed with the things of this world, the Bible says the lake of fire awaits you. Aren't you thankful that Jesus made a way for us not to go there? Jesus died on a cross, give His own life so that you and I can be forgiven. I want to ask Stephen and the musicians to come. Maybe the Lord has spoke to someone's heart today about your salvation. Or maybe there's priorities in your life that are out of whack. Priorities matter. Priorities matter. Who are you serving? The Lord or yourself? Stand if you would, and Stephen's going to come and lead us in a song. What number do you have, Stephen? 91. The Lord has spoke to your heart today. Please come forward.
I have decided to follow Jesus. I have decided to follow Jesus. I have decided to follow Jesus. No turning back, no turning back. Though none go with me, I still will follow. Though none go with me, I still will follow. Though none go with me, I still will follow. No turning back, no turning back.
I have every head bowed and every eye closed. Just